There you go. 4-punch, 5-punch, 6-punch combination. Body shot, bang, 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 bang.
Telling him not to counterpunch.
Boom! Will Rackman get up?
Iron is going through all the instructions. This is for the championship of the world. I expect a tough, clean fight. Protect yourself at all times. Any questions from the challenger?
Welcome back, fight fans, to the Fight City Podcast, the official podcast for thefightcity.com. Today, we have an exciting episode for you as thefightcity.com founder Michael Carbert sits down with contributor Hunter Breckenridge to discuss some of the most prominent and biggest delays in boxing history. This all stemming from the fact that our most recent delays occurring between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury, due to Tyson Fury unfortunately suffering a cut during his latest training camp. I think this episode contains a lot of niche boxing history as well as some historical context for why big fights like this most recent one can be difficult to make, and how delays can hurt from a fan's perspective getting these big matchups. So without further ado, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you head to thefightcity.com. The link is in our show notes for the latest boxing history archives as well as latest news from the sport. Enjoy.
So everyone, I think, in boxing was looking forward to finally having a showdown between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, and it's been canceled. We've all seen the cut. It's a deep cut. It's a big cut. It's a completely legitimate delay. But naturally, it makes us think back in boxing history and cause us to revisit some of the more memorable delays, cancellations, postponements in heavyweight history. So I thought, this would be a good topic for us to visit. And I thought we would start with a very notable fight from 1965. The rematch between, also, by the way, all of these fights are heavyweight championship fights that we're going to be talking about. So it makes perfect sense. So Fury, Usyk is ostensibly for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And so was Muhammad Ali versus Sonny Liston, the rematch in 1965. And some may not be aware that it actually was set to happen in Boston in, I believe, May of 1965. And it didn't happen because Muhammad Ali, in training, suffered a hernia, which required surgery. And so the fight was almost completely scuttled. Eventually, it was rescued and put back together, and it took place in Lewiston, Maine, of all places. And, of course, we all recall that the bizarre outcome of that fight. Many people believe it was not on the level. That fight could be a podcast all unto itself. There was so much going on there. Hunter, what are your recollections of that fight, and do you think the postponement had an impact on it?
Well, thanks for asking this one. I definitely don't recall it in person, but I do. I've read a lot about it. And of course, I've seen the fight ad nauseum. It didn't last that long. I think the delay, and one thing to mention, I believe it was originally scheduled for November '64, and the delay ended up moving it farther out. But it was, and I know part of the problem was part of why it got moved from Boston was fear over basically the controversy of the first fight. There's a lot of fear of Ali's ties to Nation of Islam and a lot of fear over Liston's ties to organized crime. And apparently, Massachusetts, kind of the state, helped push the promoters to moving it. And it was actually the governor of Maine that said, we'll take it. So kind of came to the rescue there. But it was, obviously not a hotbed of boxing. I think its odd location may have added to, it's funny because that fight had, it was a rematch. It was a controversial young new champion. Obviously the outcome itself is going to be debated till the end of the, the heat death of the universe. And I think that may have overshadowed some of the issues like the, the location and the delay and, all that's interesting too. And I think just adds to it. I don't know, the location I think also was in part to help actually reduce some of the attention, but, already this is the television era and, you don't have as many people attending in person like you would in say Boston or if they held it in New York or something, but you definitely, there's already such media attention, especially in the 60s, the heavyweight championship of the world, that was all, every major American network, international networks, everyone's going to be covering this. It's going to be on radio. It's so, already by the 60s, you have a lot of people being able to access it without being there, just 10 years before that really wasn't a thing. So, even hiding it away in relatively small town in Maine didn't do that much, to diminish it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the big question about that fight is, was it on the level? And, there's no real consensus. There's no consensus, really, even if the punch that appeared to put Sonny Liston down was legitimate. What did happen was Liston went down in the opening round. Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee and completely screwed up. He didn't even start a count, which Sonny Liston would later cite that as a reason as to why he didn't get up. He didn't hear a count. Liston did kind of start to get up, but then fell back down again. And then when Walcott was talking to the timekeeper and trying to figure out what was going on, Ali and Liston actually started to fight again. But then Walcott was informed that, no, the fight's over. Liston was on the floor definitely for more than 10 seconds. He's knocked out. So that was the end of the fight. I've never personally believed that was a fix. I mean, if it was meant to be a fix, I mean, it's the most inept way that it could possibly be done. But I do personally believe that the postponement had a big impact on what happened based on something I read. And I've read a lot of books and over the years about boxing and so on. And I wish I kept scrupulous notes, but I haven't. But I do recall one of Liston's trainers quoted as saying that when the news came that Ali had this hernia and that the fight would have to be postponed for months, that Liston was completely demoralized. And he had trained very, very hard. And when he got the news that there was going to be this long delay, he was basically, he lost his focus. He lost his determination. He fell out of training. Presumably, he didn't get back into training for weeks. And, it's just my personal conviction that what we saw is a fighter basically quit. I mean, which when you think about it, isn't a huge stretch. I mean, he was facing a guy who completely outclassed him the first time. And yeah, I can kind of see he's an aging fighter. He's the confidence isn't there. Liston was a classic bully. Bullies are when they're pushed back, they often, they don't necessarily rise to the occasion. And I do personally think that that's what we saw. We saw a demoralized fighter basically give up. And again, apparently the cancellation played a big part in Liston's outlook on the fight, his lack of fortitude, mental fortitude for the fight. Any thoughts on that?
I tend to agree with actually pretty much everything you said. Yeah, I don't think a fix, unless there's some sort of documented evidence or proof, there's no way to really confirm whether or not it was a fix. And as you said, it is one of those cases where, you have someone say like Jack Johnson would claim later to throw his fight with Jess Willard, but only after he was in the ring for 26 rounds. Like some of these attempts at claiming something was a fix, it wasn't a very good one if it was. And in this case, I tend to agree. I think the punch, whether it connected super cleanly or not, or whether it was a balance issue or whatever, I tend not to think that. I think he was knocked down. Maybe he could have gotten up, probably could have gotten up. Yeah, as you said, probably was demoralized. He was, I've read quite a bit about how he was not necessarily scared of Ali himself, but scared of his entourage and scared of a lot of the people around him. Liston was, and his own experience with organized crime. I think he tended to believe Ali was involved in his own version of organized crime. I think his own tie, he had known ties to organized crime, and I think that made him suspicious in general. From what I've read, he believed that a lot of the Islamic groups that Ali associated with were essentially themselves also organized crime. And I don't have a lot of knowledge about how true that was, but I do know that Liston himself was nervous. And Liston also, Ali liked to play up acting crazy. Like Ali was a smart guy. He wasn't educated, but he was very intelligent. And, he was quick on his feet mentally as well as physically. And he himself would do things like wind up and act kind of nuts in order to, make opponents think that this is a psychopath, this is a crazy person. And I think it worked a little bit. I think he was able to spook Liston. And yeah, I just think the whole thing was, Liston, the delay didn't help. I think the whole environment. And yeah, and we don't even know how old Liston was, not really. We know he was significantly older than Muhammad Ali, but it could have been, he could have been over 40 by that point. And, I've heard, that's one of those like kind of unknown things that it would have been hard for someone, it would have been hard for him to win that fight anyway. And I think he's just demoralized. That was a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And another factor which some speculate about is at that time, not too long before the fight, Malcolm X was assassinated.
Yep.
And there was speculation. Well, it's a fact, as I understand it, that Ali had a round-the-clock squad of bodyguards from the FBI guarding him in the lead up to that fight.
Yep.
He didn't ask for that. He didn't request that. It was imposed upon him by the FBI just in case. So there was serious speculation and concern that he would be the target of retribution for the death of Malcolm X. And some have speculated that Liston wanted the fight to be over as quickly as possible because he didn't want to get caught by any stray bullets. I don't know if there's any truth to that at all, but I mean, to add to all the factors that we've discussed, there's another one, that potentially could have affected the outcome. But anyway, to get back to the main point, there's definitely reason to believe that the cancellation, which just like Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, it's an injury. It's an injury in training, and it caused the fight to be postponed for many, many weeks. And I think it did have an impact on the outcome. Similarly, and sticking with Muhammad Ali, here's another famous case of a fight being postponed, and the parallels between this situation and the current one that we're dealing with are very close. And that's, you zoom up to 1974, George Foreman is the heavyweight champion of the world, and he is going to face Muhammad Ali in Zaire, Africa, of all places. Talk, Lewiston, Maine seemed a strange location. Well, Kinshasa in Zaire is even stranger in some respects.
Yeah.
And during training, Foreman is cut. It's a cut over the eye, not unlike the cut that Tyson Fury has suffered. And the fight had to be postponed for, I think, at least a month, maybe longer.
I think it was 5 weeks.
5 weeks. And did that have there's no question that Muhammad Ali's 8th round knockout of George Foreman is one of the most stupendous and consequential wins in boxing history. But is part of why that happened due to a sparring partner not being as careful with his elbows as he should have been, and the heavyweight champion getting a cut in training.
This is another case where, it's difficult to analyze the psychology of someone who we can't be in their head, of course. And obviously, in later years, George Foreman, appears to be a much, calmer and more, confident individual. He definitely had a lot of insecurities as a young man back in 1974. And despite his outer facade was, an affectation, honestly. A lot of it, he talked later very honestly about how he was kind of a scared kid. He wasn't comfortable in Zaire. He hated it the whole time. He brought these German shepherds with him, which did not endear him to the people there, who these specific dogs were kind of a symbol back in the colonial era of oppression. And I don't think he realized that, but there it is. It didn't help. And yeah, I think he was also kind of a situation where he was training, he was getting himself into shape, then he got cut. And I think it was Bill McMurray, who was a kind of an interesting journeyman who has his own interesting story. Actually beat Thad Spencer about a decade earlier. This wasn't a terrible fighter for a guy with a almost losing record. Good sparring partner type. But yeah, he. I think that his own psychological issues, Ali spending a lot of effort getting into his head. There's a lot of concern. The U.S. State Department has records. I'm actually looking at them right now in the National Archives. The government of Zaire was concerned Foreman would try to split, to try to leave the country and recuperate,
Yes.
and or just get out altogether. And I think there was some fear that he would use that cut as an excuse, and they wouldn't get him back just because he was so unhappy there. And I think the amount of money involved, he probably would have come back. But yeah, I get the fear too, and I could see why they'd be concerned about it. I think I think Muhammad Ali, for that fight, with everything happening, I don't think he would have been denied. I think that was his night. I don't think George Foreman of 1974 could have ever beaten him. But I definitely think Foreman wasn't at his absolute best either.
I tend to agree. I think Ali had his number. I think Foreman, his style was almost made for Ali. Of course, the loose ropes definitely helped, but
Sure.
Proponents of Foreman will point out that this cut really hampered Foreman's preparation. It meant he couldn't spar as much as he otherwise would have, and so therefore he was maybe not as sharp as he otherwise would have been. So that is a valid point. I think. I tend to think, though, that it is possible to spar, at least to some degree, with a cut. You'd have to take some precautions, but that is a factor. Is it a huge factor? That's the question. Is it a major factor in what unfolded that night in Kinshasa?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way to completely quantify like how much of a difference it made. Would George have lasted till the 9th round or the 11th round or whatever? I think the sparring, I think the sparring, the lack of sparring, I think the 5 weeks, I think that certainly didn't help.
Yeah.
I agree. It's in the end, I think at that point George was ill prepared in a lot of other ways, and I don't think his tactics were very sound. And I think, and again, and some of it was also just Ali. One of his, at that point already, he was slower than he was in his prime. He was relying more on his durability. He had some advantages, as you said, the loose ropes, and he was a tall guy who could land a lean away, and a lot of the punches lost some of their snap by the time they reached him, the ones that connected. But yeah, he, there were a lot of things, kind of factors at play here. But in the end, the, this was Muhammad Ali who wanted it so badly, and I really think a lot of it was just sheer will and durability and guts. And it was, I just don't think George at that point, especially, George's heart is unquestionable, especially, in his, once we saw his second career. But at that point, I think he was a younger guy, and he just wasn't mentally prepared for what was happening, and he wasn't tactically prepared. So
Yeah, I agree. Generally speaking, the guy throwing the straight punches has an edge over the guy throwing the big round punches, and Ali knew that. Ali, that's one of the things about that fight, which is always so fascinating, is Ali's confidence despite everything. I mean, he was a clear underdog. Even people in his own entourage were concerned about whether he was going to be, seriously injured or not. I mean, he wasn't a huge underdog in terms of, betting odds, 3-1 or 4-1. But really, in terms of the popular perception, the thinking was, Foreman's just going to demolish him. But despite that, Ali his focus was razor sharp. He was so tuned in. He knew exactly what he needed to do, and he altered his tactics during the fight. And I just want to, this is, one of my personal, I love to harp on this. The rope-a-dope is to a large extent a myth, in the sense that he lay on the ropes and Foreman was winning the fight and then got tired. That's not the case at all. Ali was winning the fight. You would be hard-pressed, if you watch the fight carefully, to give Foreman more than maybe a couple of rounds. And Ali was just boxing brilliantly off the ropes, showing his skill, his intelligence, his experience. It's really a fascinating performance, an exemplary performance of ring skill and experience.
Yeah, agreed. I think a lot of what Ali was doing was also fairly subtle, and part of it's, you talk about the straight punches versus the round ones. I mean, specifically, George at that time especially was always swinging for the fences. He threw these big looping wind up, shots, and it obviously worked great and up to that point. But yeah, against Ali, so it often looked like he was doing more, especially to someone who's not necessarily, looking at it through a very analytical eye. And, he, his punches carried weight and heft, and, he'd land a shot to the ribs and it'd make a slapping, loud sound. And yeah, of course, I think you're right. Watching that fight, going back and, really paying attention to the details. Yeah, it's clear that, George is not doing as well as the legend has it. He landed a few shots. Ali had said he got stunned once, but overall, and someone with George's heavy hands, especially at that point, could hurt even a guy like Ali. But he just wasn't landing. It wasn't just that he wasn't landing clearly. When he was, it was, Ali took body shots very well. And most of those headshots, the ones that kind of snuck through, as most of the snap and most of the power was already off of them by the time it actually connected, because he was able to lean so far back and he was able to roll his head and deflect with his hands. Yeah, it was masterful, but it was masterful in a subtle way that I think doesn't show up all that well, if you're watching on TV or something, especially in 1974 with, not exactly high def, quality and all that.
Yeah. Well, it was a big upset. And speaking of big upsets, here's another interesting example, I think, of a fight that was supposed to happen. The contracts were signed. Everyone was looking forward to it. It didn't happen, but then it did years later. And then we got the upset. And that is the matchup, arguably the biggest heavyweight matchup of the 1990s, Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. And as we all remember, it was supposed to happen in 1991. And the fight was set. It was going to take place. And then, of course, Tyson got into legal trouble, to put it mildly. He was charged with rape. He went to trial. He lost the trial. He went to jail. And he didn't get back into the ring again until 1995. Holyfield was active all through that time. He had fights with big, high-profile fights with Riddick Bowe, among others. And by the time Holyfield versus Tyson, well, first of all, the fight when it did. When it was finally set, the title of it was Finally. Finally. The matchup we've all been waiting for. But by that time, for some people, we weren't waiting for it, because the perception after losses to Michael Moore and to Riddick Bowe, Holyfield was considered to be, over the hill, finished, done. And the anticipation was that Tyson's going to steamroll him just the same way he did all his other comeback opponents, including Peter McNeely and Buster Mathis Jr. and Frank Bruno and so on.
Yep.
Didn't turn out that way. And it's interesting to speculate. Would the result have been markedly different in 1991 than as it turned out to be in 1996, when Holyfield scored arguably one of the biggest upsets in heavyweight history and defeated Mike Tyson by 11th round TKO?
It's interesting. I think with first of all, going back just a little bit, is the postponements. There's actually two postponements originally, because they were first scheduled to fight in 1990, in I think June of 1990, and then Buster Douglas happened, and that sunk that. And then after, even then, a lot of people still thought, well, it was a little fluky. Buster Douglas isn't that good. He just fought the fight of his life. His mom just died. And then of course Holyfield took him out pretty fast, and they said, okay, well, we can still get Holyfield Tyson. Now it'll just be Tyson challenging. And then, of course, as you said, he had a rib injury, and then of course his legal issues and spending some time in jail. But what's interesting about when he came back and when he did eventually fight Holyfield, a lot of people now will diminish that victory a little bit, at least what I've seen, especially in discussion forums and whatnot, saying, well, obviously Tyson was a shell of who he used to be, didn't fight like he did in the late 80s and all that. And yeah, as you noted, at the time, everyone thought kind of the opposite. Tyson may not have been quite as dynamic, and he lost a little bit, especially defensively in his comeback, but he had looked solid. He was knocking everybody. He was knocking bottom of the top 10 type guys, top 15 guys like Selden and Mathis and whatnot out in 2 or 3 rounds, Bruno, and capturing a couple alphabet belts. And, and as you said, yeah, Holyfield didn't look good. He had lost 2 fights to Bowe, lost to Moore, looked bad against Bobby Chez, who was basically a cruiserweight. And and the finally, it was, I remember that tagline too, but a lot of people are like, finally Holyfield's going to get crushed. But I'm inclined to think, and I could be wrong on this, I'm inclined to think going back to 90 or 91, I think it would have been a faster paced fight. I think Tyson would have probably, throw more combinations. His defense would have been a little sharper, but so would Holyfield's. Holyfield had slowed down by that point. He had bulked up. His stamina was a lot better in 1990, 91 than it was in 96. He was only fighting 2 minutes a round at that point. When he'd throw these sharp combos, but then he'd take half the round off. Even then, he was in his late 30s already, and a lot of people thought he was washed up too because he was old, or relatively speaking. And Mike was only like, what, 30 when he came back from prison, something like that, 31. He wasn't that old, and I'm inclined to think that maybe it would have gone the distance. Maybe it wouldn't have been a late stoppage like we actually saw. But I just think I think Holyfield knew how to negate Tyson's aggression. I think his speed and his relative quickness and his ability to, honestly, his toughness. I think we talked about this, fighters being bullies. Foreman was a bully, Liston was a bully, Tyson was a bully. And Tyson, it's not true that standing up to him meant you beat him. There were fighters that stood their ground and got crushed, but I think Holyfield is a different kind of guy. That's me. I could be convinced otherwise.
Yeah, I don't disagree. As I said, I feel like Ali had Foreman's number. I tend to think that he would have found a way to defeat Foreman had they fought more than once. And I kind of feel it's the same way with Holyfield and Tyson. I mean, boxing is a very, a huge aspect of boxing is the mental component of it. And there's no question in my mind that mentally the stronger fighter is Holyfield. And if you can get through the first couple of rounds against Tyson, he starts to slow down and he starts to slowly get a little discouraged. And of course, the ultimate example was in the rematch when Tyson completely lost it.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you. I think if the fight had happened back in 1991, if I had to bet money, it would be on Real Deal, not Iron Mike. But the case can be made that what we saw after Mike Tyson came out of prison was a mirage. That really, the Mike Tyson of 1991 would have been a better performer, a better fighter. I mean, he really had no significant opposition leading up to the Holyfield fight. At the time, he looked incredible. At the time, for most people, it seemed like the second coming of Mike Tyson, and nobody could stand up to him. He demolished, what was it? Peter McNeely, Buster Mathis Jr., who am I forgetting? Frank Bruno. Oh, Bruce Seldon. Bruce Seldon, who went down from a punch that didn't even land. I mean, all these guys were terrified.
Yeah.
And so what got overlooked was the fact that no one until Holyfield had the guts, had the backbone to actually stand up to Tyson and fight back. And lo and behold, as soon as somebody did, Tyson was not the same fighter at all. You can make the case that in that first fight with Holyfield, Tyson won no more than maybe 2 rounds. Some of the rounds were close, but overall, the guy who was controlling things, moving forward, and landing effective shots was Evander Holyfield, and people couldn't believe what they were seeing. So you can't. I mean, it's not a stretch to think that the Mike Tyson that would have entered the ring in 1991 would have been a more formidable fighter than the one in 1996. It's just that at that time in 1996, nobody saw that. Nobody perceived it that way.
100% agreed. And yeah, it's the mirage aspect. I think is an underrated. I think it's an underrated component because an underrated point because, as you said, these names, one, they weren't that. I mean, they were kind of fringe contender. Frank Bruno, I guess, is technically a contender, but Frank Bruno is probably the best of that group that we just mentioned. And one, he was not known for being the most durable, and two, yeah, he was constantly like crossing himself as he went to the ring. He looked like he was going to an execution, and he'd already been in the ring with Tyson, and while he got beat a few years earlier, he gave a decent accounting for himself. He rocked Tyson in the first round of their first fight, and you'd think he would have been the one with some confidence. And he had a title, and he finally got over that hump of the few months before, and even then couldn't do anything. Yeah, he just got steamrolled. And I think some people, I think there's this thing where people look at the lines on the paper, the numbers, the knockouts, the second round knockout, first round knockout. They don't really look at who that quality of opposition is. That's why I keep debating people about how where someone like Deontay Wilder's ranks. I got into some arguments about his Hall of Fame, what kind of career he has. Just, well, look how he had 478 knockouts. Yeah, but who did he knock out? Who? Exactly. I think that matters a little more. And yeah. Holyfield, it's true. Like at the same time, those 5 fights we just mentioned of Tyson's, but Holyfield had fought, the worst fighter he fought was Bobby Chez. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But he fought Riddick Bowe, Ray Mercer, Michael Moorer, Riddick Bowe again, like basically a who's who of the best fighters in the division at that point. And his record wasn't great, but he was fighting them. And it wasn't like he was getting blown out. Even when he did get knocked out by Bowe, he had almost knocked Bowe out right before that. So, and he might have been having a heart attack, or it wasn't a heart attack, but he was having heart issues like palpitations or something against Michael Moorer, and argue, that was a very close fight. So, it's just the quality of competition by itself, that should have given more people pause. The differences,
Well, I think we'd be remiss. You bring up the heart issue with Holyfield, and of course, nobody questions his heart metaphorically, his determination, his willingness to mix it up, and that kind of thing. But he was having serious medical issues. They really came to light in that first defeat to Michael Moorer.
Yep.
And, somebody who raises this issue when we ask the question, okay, Tyson Holyfield 1991 versus Tyson Holyfield 1996. I mean, it's a legit point. Well, when did he start juicing? And the fact of the matter is, there's nothing definitive. But some have speculated that the issues Holyfield experienced in that first fight with Michael Moorer, and subsequent to that, he seemed to have stamina issues. It was also, to my mind, like evident in the third fight with Bowe that something wasn't quite right physically. And my understanding is that some of his problems, which, by the way, he claimed were healed by, remember that evangelical preacher who laid hands on him? And Benny Hinn, that's right. Yes.
Yep.
Some who are more knowledgeable than I would ever be on performance-enhancing drugs and so on have speculated that what Holyfield was experiencing falls into the realm of predictable side effects of the use of human growth hormone. And it affects the cardiovascular system, apparently, and so on. And, so when we look, it is a valid point. When we look at Holyfield's incredible victory over Mike Tyson, which many people forget, but at the time it was a huge upset, much bigger than Ali versus Foreman, for example. In retrospect, it's obvious that Holyfield was enhancing his training with, who knows what. But definitely something. And all you have to do is look at his physique to see that this was a factor. So it is a valid question. Would he have benefited as much in 1991 from performance enhancing supplements or drugs or therapies, as he clearly did in his amazing run when he not only beat Mike Tyson twice, but then also avenged his defeat to Michael Moore, and then had two competitive fights with a naturally much bigger heavyweight in Lennox Lewis.
I mean, it's going to be difficult to speculate for certain exactly how much it benefited him, and I'm kind of liable to think maybe his early, I don't know when he may have started juicing officially, if he did. I mean, Evan Fields and all that with the Balco thing, we probably, he almost certainly was doing something. I know just even looking at like his record, you can see his weight, he was consistently 208, 207, 210, all the way up until the Riddick Bowe fights. And then all of a sudden for the second Riddick Bowe fight, he was up to 217, and he kind of spent most of the next few years like hovering right under like 215 to 220 range. And he was, that extra 10 pounds or so was clearly, it was all in his shoulders, the traps and all that. He clearly looked like he had just expanded. It wasn't quite Barry Bonds in 2002 or whatever, but he definitely looked bigger. And it's, of course, a guy can lift weights and all that and put on muscle. And he obviously had to do that along with whatever he might have been taking. But it's not like added muscle is necessarily beneficial, especially for a guy who was a pretty fast twitch sort of fighter. Adding that kind of weight to a relatively slender, framed guy may not have been incredible for him. Obviously, it did help give him some strength against, I think with Tyson in particular, I think he benefited from that extra muscle because, they grappled a lot inside, and it frustrated Mike. Mike had always been pretty passive, even in the 80s when he was a wrecking machine. Guys could pretty easily tie him up. And he didn't punch a lot in the clinch. He didn't try to outmaneuver. And someone like Holyfield, who juiced or not, was very strong. It didn't always translate to a huge punch, but he had sharp punches, and he was physically could move a guy like Mike around. And I think that helped wear Mike down too. So that might have been where the roids or what the HGH or whatever benefited him, was just physically pushing a guy who technically had a thicker body around. So,
well, it's a scenario that's fun to speculate on.
Absolutely.
What might have happened in 1991 versus what did happen in 1996. So, continuing, one more comparison that I think is very fitting to make in terms of a high profile, in this case, a cancellation, not just a postponement. And that would be the rematch that was supposed to happen. The contracts were signed. Both fighters went into training for it. And that's the rematch between Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko. And this is a really fascinating chapter, I think, in heavyweight history. The first fight was a strange fight in certain respects.
Yes.
And Fury's victory was definitely something of an upset. And Klitschko immediately, felt the feeling was that Klitschko saw the error of his ways, that he realized he had been too passive, and he just simply wasn't active enough in that fight with Tyson Fury, and he wanted a rematch as soon as possible. And he had the right, according to the contract, to activate the rematch clause. And so the rematch was signed. It was going to happen. Both fighters went into training. And then what happened exactly, Hunter? I don't know. Does anybody know? I mean, by all accounts, Tyson Fury was training hard. And then what? All of a sudden, he decided to pick up and go to Ibiza and party his ass off or something.
I in the end, only Tyson Fury knows exactly what happened with him. I know that he himself had tested positive for some banned substances at what kind of during that time. I also say just first for the fight itself, yeah, it was a really awkward fight. At the time, especially, I was higher on Klitschko than a lot of my friends and contemporaries in boxing, and I always liked the guy a lot, just personally. And I was rooting for him against Fury, and it was frustrating to watch because, yeah, it seemed like Fury did a good job kind of freezing Klitschko, keeping him from really throwing a lot. And Klitschko kind of came alive in the last round when it was too little too late. And he landed a couple of shots, but it didn't mean much. I mean, Fury, was neither guy threw much. It was really an ugly, unpleasant fight in a lot of ways. But it was a rare situation where Klitschko wasn't significantly stronger and wasn't able to push Fury around like he'd been used to doing. And Fury was in good shape. Like Fury's physique gets mocked quite a lot in the boxing world. Some of it's fair, some of it's maybe less so. But he's always a guy who probably is in better shape than he looks without necessarily being in great shape. He seems to have pretty good stamina considering, and pretty good speed for a guy his size. But with that fight, he looked good. He was actually kind of cut, and looked like he was in pretty good shape. And maybe there's some substance issues there. I'm not going to speculate and say I know for certain what all he had in him, but I don't think anyone's completely clean. I think a lot of guys are not that clean. So that's, I don't want to get too conspiracy theory minded there. But yeah, I think, I don't know what his mental health issues are. I think, I wouldn't be shocked if he legitimately did suffer from some form of depression. I think he also suffered from some form of cocaine and alcohol. And I think a lot of it was just substance issues. He gained a lot of weight, apparently hit 400 pounds or something like that, some insane amount of weight. And I saw some pictures of him where he looked huge. And for whatever reason, may, he seems like a confident guy. I don't necessarily think he was scared of the rematch, but I do think Klitschko could have done better, especially if Fury's head wasn't in it. I mean, a lot of Fury's issue is also, where he's at mentally. I don't know if he's crazy or has real mental issues or he's a con artist, but he's not always all there, clearly. And you can tell in some of his performances. He clearly had more of his head on straight in 2015 when he fought Klitschko the first time.
Well, I'll just go on record here as saying that I never really bought the whole depression and story from Tyson Fury. Klitschko was frustrated, and he basically got tired of waiting around for Tyson Fury, and he gave up.
Yeah.
He had a legitimate right to pursue that rematch. But Tyson Fury basically did, in my opinion, this is just my, take, just my personal opinion. I think Tyson Fury wanted nothing to do with Vladimir Klitschko in a rematch. I think in a rematch we would have seen the Klitschko that everyone expected to see, and I think he would have beaten Tyson Fury, not without some difficulty, but I think
Sure.
it would have clearly been a Klitschko's fight to lose. And Tyson Fury is no dummy, and I think he did what he needed to do to avoid that fight. It's just my personal opinion. But that falls in line with other aspects of Tyson Fury's behavior, public utterances that are bizarre. The thing I always come back to is there's really no reason on earth why a Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua fight hasn't happened, except that somebody didn't want it to happen. I mean, that has to be one of the biggest fights available in the sport. We're talking massive paydays. It would be absolutely huge, monumental in Great Britain. But my personal conviction is that Tyson Fury wants nothing to do with getting in the ring with Anthony Joshua. I think Tyson Fury is a very smart operator, and he makes careful, calculated choices about his career. It made a lot more sense for him to fight a guy like Deontay Wilder than Anthony Joshua in terms of giving himself chances to win. And, there's all this other stuff, the things that he's like. The thing I always come back to is, remember when he said he made this big promise he was going to give millions of dollars to homeless people, and and then it evaporated. And he has this way of being bombastic and saying crazy things and doing crazy things, and meanwhile the most meaningful fights don't always happen. And it seemed like we had to wait a very long time for Fury versus Usyk to be signed and sealed. And here we are. The fight at this moment in time is not happening, or at least is going to be delayed for a very long time. And this falls into a pattern, which goes back to the scuttled Klitschko Fury rematch. And just to illustrate, when Fury versus Usyk was finally announced, it's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen in February. So many people were like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see both these guys in the ring. And this says something not about anyone except Tyson Fury. It's a legitimate point of view, it seems to me.
I agree. And it's hard for me, as I've kind of said this before, it's hard for me to speculate what's going on in somebody else's mind, especially someone whose mind is clearly as chaotic as Tyson Fury. Maybe some of it is con artistry, maybe some of it is instability, maybe he just needs to lay off the booze on week. I don't know. Stay away from the pubs a little bit more. Whatever his issues is, I think. I don't know how afraid he is of anybody versus, maybe it's a risk reward aspect. I do
Yes.
agree going, with Klitschko. Yeah, I think he was aware he was going to get a different and tougher fight had they fought in 2016. I personally thought Klitschko had a shot at stopping him late. I don't know if that, especially if Klitschko fought him the way he did Joshua a year after that, that was a pretty good version of him despite his loss there. I think Anthony Joshua is an interesting guy whose stock has dropped in a lot of ways thanks to the Ruiz fight, the first Ruiz fight, but I think he presents a very different sort of challenge than, say, Deontay Wilder. Yeah, Wilder has that one wrecking ball, his right hand, and it's dangerous. And he's also a tough guy. Like, I don't think Deontay Wilder is that great a fighter. I think the power does keep some fighters cowed from him, and I think he's got legitimate heart and durability. And I think that's about it. And I think his pretty sloppy style was kind of tailor made. I mean, Fury still got dropped a few times, obviously, especially in that first and third fight. But I think Deontay Wilder was a better bet, despite a lot of people rating him higher than Joshua. Joshua is a smarter boxer than Fury. You talked about straight versus round punches. He's a better boxer, throws straighter punches. He has enough power to hurt. If Deontay Wilder is a 10 out of 10 in power, Joshua is a 9.5 out of 10. He's not that far off. He's a hitter too. He hasn't always demonstrated it, especially like you say against Usyk, but Usyk is special, as we know. So yeah, I think I'm not inclined to automatically say he's trying to do anything specific against Usyk yet, because the fight is, as far as I know, it's still scheduled, even though it's been moved to May 18th, I think. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I'm inclined to provide, offer a little grace and say, let's see if it gets delayed again, because the cut seemed legitimate, and it looks rough, and it's a reasonable point to postpone it. But beyond that, Tyson Fury has not helped himself with his past behavior. Like, it's understandable to be a little to be skeptical about his sincerity, considering everything that's happened over the last, his whole career basically, especially since post Klitschko fight.
So then, obviously, the next thing to discuss is, instead of as opposed to looking back into the past and these examples of fights that could have or should have been, or what might have been if the fights hadn't been postponed or delayed. So now we're dealing with a situation very similar, and years from now, maybe fight fans will speculate, will wonder, what if Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk had taken place when it was initially set to happen instead of several months later? I believe the fight is now set for May. Will this long delay, we're talking at least 3 months, is it going to have a significant influence on the outcome? And does either fighter benefit from this in any way? What are your thoughts, Hunter?
Well, I mean, in theory, the guy whose commitment to conditioning is a little more questionable, in theory, would benefit from the delay. I don't know how much of the next 3 months he's going to spend in the gym. If he's smart, hopefully a lot. It's possible to overtrain, obviously, and you want to give yourself a little bit of room for recovery. Especially, he has to be careful with his cut. Watch, probably not going to be sparring for a little while, that kind of thing. Obviously can still work out. I think obviously we know Usyk tends to be a little more professional about that sort of thing. He comes into the fights in shape. He's not a massive specimen by any means, but he's clearly, not. He seems to keep himself in shape quite well between fights. On the other hand, it's also fair to note that Usyk's country is currently in the middle of an invasion, and he's probably a little distracted by that too. I think a lot of it comes to Tyson Fury. If he's really serious about this fight and really cares about it, this could benefit him more than it would benefit Usyk, I think. I think he has more to gain, especially in terms of conditioning, especially in terms of tactics, that kind of thing. He just came off a pretty lousy performance against a guy with no professional boxing experience whatsoever. I think he won that fight, but he didn't win it by a lot. So, against a guy who's now 0-1, and not to diminish, his past opponent, but that can be kind of, it's a different situation. He obviously, we know he fights down to the level of his opponents sometimes. Again, that's kind of a preparedness and professionalism has always been a thing with him. I believe Fury will get up for this fight, assuming it happens. I think this delay should benefit him more than it benefits Usyk. I just don't know if it's enough. Because Usyk, again, is a far more professional person. Usyk's kind of a weird guy himself, but he's a weird guy in a way that doesn't diminish what he does in the ring. You know what I mean? He's kind of a goofy guy, but he's not a boozer or a drinker or a cokehead or whatever. As far as I know.
I have to be careful because my judgment may be skewed by my great, great desire to see the end of the Tyson Fury era. I think he's been, the negative far outweighs the positive in terms of his reign, if you can call it that, or his time at the top of the heavyweight division. I do think that this is Usyk's fight to lose. I've felt this way for quite a while. My pick, it would be the cat. I think he's the more talented fighter. He's the more steady, more disciplined fighter, more skilled fighter, and he's more versatile. He's got more tools to use against Fury. Fury's size. That's his big advantage. He's a much bigger guy, longer. I don't see that bothering Usyk very much. And what is going to bother somebody is when Usyk starts landing with regularity, flush shots. Having said all that, I agree. If this postponement is going to help anybody, it's going to help Tyson Fury. So it will be a challenge, I think, for Usyk. It's a new challenge now. It's a kind of a different fight now, and the challenge, in part at least, for the Ukrainian will be to stay focused, to not lose his focus, to not get distracted by anything, to not be disturbed by any of Fury's antics or what is unfolding now, and at the same time to not get stale. So that's another thing. It appeared there was speculation that Usyk might get in the ring again, might get in the ring between this setback and when the fight will finally take place. Obviously, that talk disappeared pretty fast. I don't think that's going to happen. They're not going to take that chance. And so how is he going to manage his conditioning and his preparation so that he's sharp and fresh and motivated when the fight finally does happen? So, yeah, it's an interesting scenario, but I tend to think that there won't be too much speculation after the fact as to what might have happened in February as opposed to May. My money is still on Usyk coming through, no matter what. And who knows? That cut may reopen in the fight. That wouldn't be a shock, and that could be a major factor because that's old scar tissue, and that cut looks deep, and that you never know. I think overall, Usyk is the fresher, more talented fighter. He's undefeated. Well, so's Tyson Fury, but Usyk is the more impressive fighter. He's the one, in my opinion, who I think is the favorite to win this fight. It's his fight to lose, I believe.
I can't really argue against any of that. I think your analysis is pretty spot on here. I generally agree. I do think I think Tyson, I will say about it's not just his size. I think when he's focused and on, he does know how to use his size pretty well. He also knows how to use he's not bad at distance. He's not bad at his footwork. He is obviously a significantly larger man. I don't know how effective that weight will be. If he comes in the type of shape, even close to the shape when he fought Klitschko, it could be actually more interesting. I think while his shape condition is a little deceptive, because again, I think he often has pretty good wind for a guy who's clearly got 20, 30 extra pounds over what he needs to have. He's also not getting younger. Usyk's actually the older man, but I think just the overall mileage, Fury's got a lot more on him from mostly just the hard living. I don't think I wouldn't actually count Fury out. I think he has a shot in general, kind of just through his being a frustrating individual to fight. I think that's the big thing. And it's possible Usyk's just has his head on his head is on too straight to really be psyched out by Fury's antics. But Fury's a strong guy. He can take a punch. He's definitely going to land his share of shots. He's again much larger. He's not as tall as he claims. I'll die on this hill. He's not 6'9". He's maybe 6'7.5", but that's still much larger than Usyk. Regardless, he's still an NBA sized player and a fighter, and I tend to agree that he'd have to be special. He'd have to really show his potential, and even if he has the capability of it, I don't think he's got it in his mind anymore. I don't think his body's going to handle it. I think maybe the Fury of 2015 could outpoint Usyk, but I don't think that's going to happen now. I think Usyk will probably win this.
Well, I think we've covered all the bases, Hunter, and I want to thank you for being on the podcast.
Sure.
And
much appreciated.
No doubt, when we get closer, if Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk actually happens, and who knows
Fingers crossed.
if it will ever happen, who knows? that could be the thing that people will look back on in the future. What if the fight had ever happened? But if it does happen, for sure, we'll be talking about it more. We'll be talking about it again closer to the date, because I know you will always be fascinated in any high-profile heavyweight matchup, Hunter. And
Sure.
this is a fascinating fight in so many different ways. So I look forward to that.
Hey everyone, it's Jeff here. If you like today's episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out all of our other content on thefightcity.com. The website link can be found in our show notes. Till next time.